A man can lie, steal, and even kill. But as long as he hangs on to his pride, he's still a man. All a woman has to do is slip once, and she's a tramp.
Hello and welcome back to The Road to Contention, a series about westerns. This is the second part of our exploration of the 1954 classic Johnny Guitar. Previously we talked about what it meant for a woman to wield a gun in a western. This time we are looking at portrayals of female sexuality in the westerns of the classic Hollywood era, in order to better understand Johnny Guitar within that context.
Oh, the first kiss is always the sweetest, from under a broad sombrero. The first kiss is always...
Traditionally, there are two roles that a woman in a western can take: the school teacher and the saloon girl.
Under a broad sombrero.
The school teacher is pure, chaste, noble, restrained, beautiful, modest, intelligent, always white, almost always Anglo-Saxon, and often blonde. To be clear, when I'm saying school teacher here, I'm referring to a stock character type. She isn't always a literal school teacher.
I'm the new school mom.
That's mighty nice, ma'am.
The term school teacher is essentially code for virgin, a fact that was well enough established in the minds of audiences that some Western comedy films even made fun of it.
Take your arm away this second.
Oh?
Listen, I'm supposed to be a school teacher.
Often the school teacher character is either the daughter of a wealthy, respected gentleman from the town, or a woman from the East, sheltered from the violent, uncivilized aspects of the West. She is destined, we hope, to become the wife of the hero. She will be his reward once he's taken care of the villains. Then there is the saloon girl. Seductive, vivacious, rebellious, disrespectful to authority, brash, jovial. Often white, but also often either Native American or Mexican in heritage. To be very clear, in a classic Hollywood western, if a woman is called a saloon girl or a dance hall girl, or if she wears frills and feathers and exposes her legs, then that means she's a sex worker. That fact might not be made overt in the films themselves. That's because it couldn't be. At the time, Hollywood films were censored by the Hays Code, which effectively prohibited tackling these themes in an explicit way, so they had to be hinted at and talked around.
Here, I expect you to encourage the customers to spend their money freely.
What if we see someone we'd like to marry?
Go ahead and marry him.
After he's broke?
You may get some money after you're married. Why not be sure and get it before?
This dichotomy of saloon girl and school teacher is indicative of what Freud called the Madonna whore complex, a tendency for men to see women as either saintly virgins or debased prostitutes. This can be a cultural pathology as much as a personal one, and the dichotomy shows up in a lot of American cinema and culture of the time. For instance, noir films of the same period often had their protagonists torn between a femme fatale.
You're no good and neither am I. That's why we deserve each other.
And the girl next door.
Well, I'd like to build a house right there. Marry you, live in it, and never go anywhere else.
However, it must be said that in the classic Hollywood western, the dichotomy between the school teacher and the saloon girl wasn't rendered in as morally rigid and conservative terms as you perhaps expect, and these characters weren't always merely passive props in stories centered around men. In films like Silver Load, for instance, you get the school teacher and the saloon girl teaming up at the end in order to save the hero. A woman marked out at first as a school teacher type might surprise us with her worldliness or ability with a gun, while saloon girls were often more sympathetic, complicated, and interesting than they may appear.
You've got that look between the lines. You with your let's get more than friendly designs.
Perhaps the queen of the saloon girls was Marlene Dietrich. She only appeared in 3 westerns, but nevertheless embodied the archetype more fully than any other actress.
I love it.
Dietrich had risen to international stardom in the early 1930s, in large part due to a series of iconic collaborations with the director Josef von Sternberg, which included classics like Shanghai Express, The Blue Angel, and The Scarlet Empress.
Give me a kiss.
In these films, she often played sex workers. How explicit that was varied from film to film. She also was often provocative towards male authority, and transgressive of gender norms. Sternberg's almost excessively gorgeous, ornate visual style created images of Dietrich so rapturously beautiful, we regard her almost as a divine, radiant being. However, by the late 30s, Dietrich's career was in decline. She was labelled box office poison.
See what the boys in the back room will have.
Her first western, Destry Rides Again, was an attempt at a much-needed comeback. Ostensibly, her character has a lot in common with the role she plays for Sternberg, being a singer and, implicitly, a prostitute.
I don't want your husband, Mrs. Callahan. All I want is his money.
Who delights in transgression.
All right. $30 against your pants.
My pants?
But the way she is filmed lacks that sense of transcendent, almost celestial beauty.
Who's buying me a drink?
That was, in fact, part of the point. Sternberg, when advising her to take the part, said, "I made you into a goddess. Now show them. You have feet of clay." The film was a huge success, relaunching Dietrich's career. Her role was iconic enough that it was parodied almost 4 decades later in the form of Lily von Stupp in Blazing Saddles.
Coming and going and going and coming, and always too soon.
In Destry Rides Again, there's something of a love triangle between Dietrich's character Frenchie, the new sheriff Destry played by James Stewart, and the good, respectable woman, Janice. All the chemistry and screen time happens between Destry and Frenchie, however, with Janice relegated to the sidelines. Much of the joy and pleasure of the film comes from seeing the charged interactions between Stewart and Dietrich, who were reportedly having an affair off-screen.
How about it?
At the end of the story, however, Frenchie must heroically sacrifice herself to save Destry.
Bye.
So that he can end up with Janice, the decent woman.
You know, speaking of marriage, Janice.
Yes, Tom?
I had a friend once.
In many classic Hollywood westerns, we see saloon girls take a bullet for the hero, redeeming their sins, and also making sure that they are out of the way, so that he can end up with the right girl.
We'll have no brawls here, gentlemen. Unless they're over me.
In 1942's The Spoilers, however, Dietrich's saloon girl actually owns the saloon, and she fares a little better out of the narrative. Again, there's a love triangle, this time between her character Cherry Malotte, her love interest Roy Glenister, played by John Wayne, and a schoolteacher type named Helen Chester.
You made it possible for that cheap bunch of crooks to put Roy in jail. And now you're going to sneak away.
Although this time round, Helen turns out to be the treacherous villain, and Dietrich keeps her man.
Anything you can win, you can collect.
The Spoilers also happens to be a film in which John Wayne does blackface.
How is you, old sweet thing? I figured it was about time for us to get acquainted.
So, yeah, that's a yikes from me on this one.
Yeah, now wait a minute. Y'all ain't no colored boy.
Rancho Notorious, made in 1952 by German master Fritz Lang, is a more morbid, dark, tragic work than Dietrich's previous westerns. It's a story of
hate, murder, and revenge,
as the theme song loves to remind us throughout the film. The schoolteacher type gets raped and murdered within the first 5 minutes, just to give you an idea of the tone. Dietrich plays the notorious saloon girl Alta Keen, and a large amount of the first act of the story is spent with various characters relating her escapades in flashback.
Alter Keen, yeah!
What are you laughing at?
Oh, that name takes me back a long time.
She, in her way, has become as legendary as a famous gunslinger. She's like the Jesse James of prostitutes. However, she has now given that life up, and runs a ranch where bandits can hide from the law. For a price.
Little Joe. Oh, whatever he's doing now, I don't know.
In all these films, Dietrich is constantly navigating her way through a male-dominated world, using seduction, humour, intelligence, and displays of bravado and strength to disarm, charm, and intimidate men who always seem to want a little more from her than she is willing to give.
Tonight she sleeps.
There's a tragedy at the heart of Dietrich's characters. However skilled or successful they might be, the men always have their thumbs on the scales. And often, they, like so many other saloon girls, are doomed to a tragic end.
She stepped in front of that bullet to save you.
One way for a saloon girl to survive is to reform. In John Ford's Stagecoach, one of the defining films of the Western genre, the character Dallas, played by Claire Trevor, is marked out early on as a saloon girl.
Can they make me leave town when I don't want to go? Do I have to go?
Dallas, don't you go...
She is introduced to us being run out of town by the Law and Order League and forced to take the titular stagecoach. Dallas will later fall in love with the Ringo Kid, the hero of the story, played by John Wayne. She worries that her past will mean that he will not accept her.
But you don't know me. You don't know who I am.
Ringo asked me to marry him.
Is that wrong for a girl like me?
And yet, in the end, it turns out not to matter, and they wind up symbolically, if not yet literally, married. Dallas is very much at the heart of Stagecoach. Claire Trevor was actually billed higher than John Wayne, as she was the biggest star at that point. And so one of the most important westerns of all time has a sex worker as the central character and main figure of audience identification. However, in order for her to earn the audience's sympathy, she needs to reaffirm her desire to reform and leave her past behind. When another woman on the stagecoach gives birth, Dallas is the one who looks after the baby, proving her natural maternal instincts.
It's a baby.
The plotline of the saloon girl, reformed by her love for the hero, plays out in many Hollywood westerns. A notable example is Winchester 73, which even introduces the saloon girl character in the exact same way as Stagecoach, with her being run out of town. All of these tropes and dynamics are very much present in Johnny Guitar, where Vienna is marked out in dialogue as a saloon girl, although as she herself states, she's a saloon girl who now owns the saloon.
5 years ago I met you in a saloon. Now I find you in one. I don't see much change.
Except I own this one.
More than that, however, she owns the film and is at the centre of the narrative. As V.F. Perkins writes, making the saloon woman the hero was almost as big a twist as making the gunfighter female. Removing the saloon woman from her marginal, oppositional place in the structure, the place that typically she would at last vacate and all but renounce in stopping a bullet for the hero, could not only be a structural change, it entailed an upheaval in the system of values that was furthered. Similar to Alta Keen in Rancho Notorious, Vienna has successfully used her sexual appeal to attain wealth and power. However, also like Alta, men resent both her power and her means of obtaining it, including those who should be on her side.
Heard you had a little luck.
Luck had nothing to do with it.
I was being polite.
I'm not ashamed of how I got what I have. The important thing is I've got it.
Early in the film, Johnny confronts Vienna about her sexual history, asserting that it in some way lessens or cheapens her.
What right have you to judge?
I once loved you. A man takes a pride in something he really cares for. He hates to see it trampled.
Here Johnny is implicitly demanding from Vienna the undying devotion and promise to reform that we have seen from characters like Dallas. He wants her to disavow her past so they can start afresh together. Vienna points out the underlying misogyny behind this request.
A man can lie, steal, and even kill. But as long as he hangs on to his pride, he's still a man. All a woman has to do is slip once, and she's a tramp.
Vienna understands that the issue is not her past, but rather Johnny's jealous insecurity, and she deliberately provokes him with barbed lines of dialogue.
Did you honestly believe after 5 years I'd be waiting for you?
She claims to have lost all feeling for him, although her pause to look longingly back at him before entering her bedroom reveals that this is not the case. They recapitulate this argument later on at night in one of the film's most famous scenes. This time, they are more emotionally fraught and vulnerable.
How many men have you forgotten?
Johnny is stripped of the masculine bravado we would expect from a Western hero, revealing an underlying desperation, bordering almost on hysteria.
As many women as you remembered.
Whilst Vienna is the more stoic and stone-faced of the two.
Lie to me. Tell me all these years you've waited. Tell me.
All these years I've waited.
When Johnny asks that Vienna lie to him, demanding a performance from her, she repeats back the lines of dialogue he's conceived with flat affect, deliberately underlining the falseness of his words.
I still love you like you love me.
And yet Crawford wavers her voice ever so slightly, allowing the audience to deduce that she really does mean what she's saying, even if Johnny is too blinded by his own ego to realise it.
Stop feeling so sorry for yourself. You think you had it rough. I didn't find this place. I had to build it. How do you think I was able to do that?
I don't want to know.
But I want you to know.
Vienna again tries to provoke his jealous insecurity, and it becomes apparent that she holds Johnny partly responsible for her having to turn to sex work.
No, you're going to listen.
I told you I don't want to know anymore.
You can't shut me up, John.
But in the end, she has to admit her real feelings.
I searched for you and every man I met.
Look, Vienna.
Johnny again reverts back to make-believe and performance, inviting her to join in a fantasy to cover up the painful truth.
It's just like it was 5 years ago. Nothing's happened in between.
Oh, I wish...
Not a thing. You've got nothing to tell me because it's not real. Only you and me. That's real. We're having a drink at the bar in the Aurora Hotel. The band is playing. We're celebrating because we're getting married.
As he leads her down the pretend aisle, the look on Vienna's face is full of longing, but also terrified at the prospect of losing herself in the moment, and the vulnerability that would entail. The darkness of Vienna's bar becomes a blank space for both the characters and the audience to project an imagined wedding chapel. Indeed, it's when Vienna stares into the nothingness that she becomes overtaken with the fantasy.
I have waited for you, John. What took you so long?
The scene constantly fluctuates between artifice and authenticity. Indulging in make-believe is the only way to unearth Vienna and Johnny's true feelings, and it's the most false-sounding dialogue that carries the most weight.
Tell me you'd have died if I hadn't come back.
I would have died if you hadn't come back.
It's like we are seeing these two film characters attempt to navigate the way towards a genuine expression of intimacy, but having no resources for doing so, except for performance and fantasy. The sequence lays bare the gender politics underlying so many narratives of this kind. We see the demands placed on women to fit into men's desires and expectations, to suppress the aspects of themselves that might seem threatening. Vienna is torn between wanting to resist these demands, while still longing for the man who makes them. In the next scene, following their imagined wedding, they seem now to be playing the part of a respectable married couple, taking a carriage ride to town. Vienna is now dressed in a long skirt, both feminine and modest, and their dialogue has a mannered formality.
Well, what are we waiting for?
Where are we going?
To town.
Whilst they share playful, furtive glances that suggest they are enjoying play-acting the roles of man and wife, with a sense of subtle irony. For some reason, John Carradine seems weirdly happy that his boss got laid. The music underscoring the sequence creates a tranquil sense of innocence, yet when Johnny goes to hitch the horses outside the bank, the music turns, as does Vienna's expression, and we linger on her discomfort. Only for her and the soundtrack to snap back into that halcyon state once Johnny turns back to face her. Is this moment simply Vienna having a premonition of the robbery her and Johnny are about to be caught up in? I don't think so. To me, it feels like one of those haunting, dread-filled moments where you realise that you are in a dream, but are unable to act on that realisation, because soon your disbelief will be suspended again, willingly or otherwise, and you'll be lost in the reverie. The idea that Johnny and Vienna are now a happily married couple is make-believe. Shame, resentment, and jealousy still lurk beneath the surface of their relationship. It is only through the violence and conflict of the story to come that these underlying issues will be resolved. Which brings us at last to Emma, who in many ways is Vienna's opposite. So if Vienna is a take on the saloon girl archetype, does that make Emma the equivalent to the chaste, sinless schoolteacher? Well, for one thing, Emma's costume was described by the actress who played her, Mercedes McCambridge, as a slightly modified nun's habit. And it seems that she is an unmarried spinster, although, in the novel on which Johnny Guitar is based, she has a husband, but he has been written out of the film's story. Emma is a terrifying perversion of this schoolteacher archetype. Her presumed virginity is not a sign of purity and innocence, but instead has shaped her into a repressive, puritanical force, possessed by a disgust for the unvirtuous, driven by a mad need to destroy any threat to the status quo.
I won't sleep till I see both of you hanged. You and the kid and all of your filthy kind.
Her persecution of Vienna seems to stem from the saloon owner's breaches in sexual morality.
You're nothing but a railroad tramp. You're not fit to live among decent people.
She's lying, that tramp.
Notably, the word tramp is used again by Vienna in her conversation with Johnny.
All a woman has to do is slip once, and she's a tramp.
Meaning perhaps that the insult has gotten under her skin, or Vienna is trying to link Johnny's attitude towards her sexual history with Emma's. However, Emma's judgment results in more than bitter recriminations. Her sexual repression manifests as a tumultuous, violent anger that seeks to destroy those who transgress against her sense of morality and partake in the sensual pleasures that she cannot. McCambridge's performance embodies this brilliantly. It often seems like there's an immense, uncontrollable energy inside her that's constantly trying to burst forth. Vienna seems to understand the way these underlying pathologies drive Emma, better than anybody, including Emma herself.
That's why he held up the stage and killed my brother, because now he thinks he can get me. That's why.
You've got it a little twisted, haven't you, Emma? Now you think you can get him.
She's crazy.
You want the kid and you're so ashamed of it you want him dead. You want me dead, too. Then maybe you can sleep nights.
Emma feels a sense of lust and desire that she finds shameful, and so she must hate the object of that desire, the dancing kid, and hate Vienna too, because they have had a relationship. That is why she scapegoats them for the murder of her brother. Soon after this moment, the dancing kid arrives with his friends, and after a tense standoff, we get a surreal sequence where we get a sense of how the dancing kid earned his name. He grabs Emma forcefully and seems to be dancing with her as a means of humiliating her, and yet Emma cannot resist, and bizarrely the mob just looks on, despite having come here for the express purpose of hunting him down. The look on Emma's face is ambivalent. It strikes me as similar to the look Vienna has as she's being led through the dark by Johnny, simultaneously wanting to give in to a fantasy just for a moment, and to believe that she is desired, yet terrified by the haunting knowledge in the back of her mind that this is just a cruel masquerade. This comes to an end when the dancing kid at last notices the body of Emma's brother. And in a moment of genuine humanity, apologizes.
I'm sorry, Emma.
The only other significant scene between Emma and the dancing kid comes right near the end during the final showdown. Emma has wounded Vienna, and the dancing kid gets up, throws down his gun, and yells out a name. But it's not Vienna, the woman he supposedly loves, and whose life is most in danger. What are we to make of their interplay at this moment? Emma's guttural yell, the glee in her eyes, the mixture of horror and ecstasy on the dancing kid's face before he falls to the ground. It's a bizarre moment in a film full of them. One obvious reading is that this is a perverse, thanatotic sexual release for Emma, and seemingly for the dancing kid too, who by yelling Emma's name might be revealing his own hidden preferences. But perhaps could it be that Emma's quick, gleeful dispatch of the kid instead reveals that he was never truly the one at the centre of her fantasy? Right after his death, she turns her attention to her real foe, Vienna. Something that a lot of critics and commentators have noticed is that in spite of the repeated assertions that Emma is driven by her repressed lust towards the dancing kid.
Why does she hate you so?
She's in love with the kid.
Last night she was trying awful hard to get him hung.
He makes her feel like a woman, and that frightens her.
She spends far more time pursuing Vienna.
I've been right about that woman ever since she came. I wanted to run her out before she ever got in, but you wouldn't listen.
Emma herself says of Vienna and the dancing kid.
They both cast the same shadow.
The scenes between the two women certainly have a unique charge to them.
I'm going to kill you.
I know. If I don't kill you first.
The alternative explanation that people loved to advance was that Emma truly was in love with Vienna, not with the dancing kid, and that was the source of her fury, her unwillingness to admit that attraction.
You promised me I wouldn't die.
During the lynching scene when Emma has Turkey hanged, she seems not to care at all about the boy himself. Instead, the second he dies, she spins violently around to see Vienna's reaction. She isn't interested in merely defeating her enemies. She specifically wants to cause Vienna pain, to see that pain and to feed off of it. When Vienna is about to be hanged, and the men refuse to do the deed, meaning that Emma must do it herself, a large phallic whip is presented before her, and the psychosexual undercurrents are clear. Certain critics have found this link between Emma's sexual repression, her potential latent lesbianism, and her violent, villainous actions indicative of the film's underlying misogyny and homophobia. As Pamela Robertson writes, Emma's twisted and psychotic mind also reflects stereotypical 1950s images of sick or evil lesbians who lived in shame and self-hatred. In this reading of the film, Emma no longer represents the pressure exerted by the mainstream on outsiders, but instead herself is a threatening other that needs to be destroyed. And yet, Pamela Robertson also claims that the film historically has had a lesbian following. In part, this may have to do with the way Vienna is presented. As we've discussed previously, Vienna's costuming marks her out as having a fluidity in her gender expression.
If you're a gay audience and you're accustomed to crumbs, how you will watch an entire movie just to see somebody wear an outfit that you think means that they're homosexual. The whole movie can be a dud, but you're just sitting there waiting for Joan Crawford to put on her black cowboy shirt again.
Meanwhile, the hostility between Emma and Vienna, at times counterintuitively, appears to be evidence of a level of intimacy and understanding between them.
The passion between these two women exceeds any narrative function at all. In fact, it kind of defies explanation or logic, but it is the engine of the film, and it does set everything else in motion. I'm perfectly happy to read Vienna and Emma as some kind of thwarted love affair. Or I suppose if I had to fix on a good interpretation, I'd say they were lovers long ago before the film started, before any of these men got in the way. And it's over for Vienna, and it will never be over for Emma. And we've all known breakups like that.
It's worth noting that Johnny Guitar was not the only Western from this era that was widely perceived to have this kind of lesbian subtext. As we discussed briefly in the last episode, many female-led Westerns queer-coded their characters to lesser or greater extents. For instance, in Outlaw Women, the character Dora is more or less outright depicted as a lesbian. She's the only major character who never shows any romantic interest in men, and she's briefly seen checking out her boss Iron May as she walks by, whilst not reacting in like manner to a man. Most notably, Calamity Jane, like Johnny Guitar, has become something of a gay classic, as has the song Secret Love performed in the film.
Once I had a secret love.
Gosh almighty, you're the prettiest thing I ever seen.
woman could look like that.
In addition to its perceived lesbian subtext, the queer readings of Johnny Guitar have also focused on the excessiveness of its style and tone. There's the feverish, libidinal intensity of Mercedes McCambridge's performance, the baroque nature of Vienna's costuming and the interior of her tavern, the dramatic staging of the crowd shots, the explosions and sandstorms dramatically underscoring the dialogue.
I'm going to stay. I'm going to fight, but I won't kill.
The way the dialogue itself is often straight out of a pulp novel.
That's big talk for a little gun. You can't shoot all of us.
And, of course, the film's bold use of colour. Johnny! All of these elements render the film overwrought, at times ridiculous even. They're a big part of the reason Johnny Guitar was rejected by critics on release, and subsequently have led to the film being labelled as camp. Camp is a style known for ridiculousness and excess, and is often associated with queer politics and identity. Cultural products that are deemed camp are often enjoyed because they fall outside of the norms of good taste and respectability. In the classic Hollywood era, straightforward depiction of homosexuality was banned by the Hays Code. Yet many of the films that were made at the time, in particular lavish musical productions, have resonated with gay audiences, in part due to their camp aesthetics.
I wonder why does everybody look at me?
In addition to its excessiveness, Johnny Guitar's reputation for being camp is also based in large part on the persona of the film's star, Joan Crawford.
You slut.
Crawford's relationship to camp is both interesting and fraught.
No war! Hangers!
Her career spanned 6 decades and involved several reinventions. She'd been a flapper in the 20s, and a relatable working-class girl during the Great Depression.
Tired? Dead.
Early in her career, she was perhaps renowned more for her beauty than her talent.
No, thank you very much, postman.
Her face was iconic, with its high cheekbones and sculpted eyebrows. Sexual aggressiveness was a key part of her on-screen persona, whilst rumours about her sex life off-screen circulated throughout Hollywood. It has even been claimed that studio bosses would keep her in check by blackmailing her with threats to make her exploits public. In the early 1940s, her career had begun to stagnate. Like Marlene Dietrich, she was labelled box office poison. And so she jumped ship from her studio MGM and went to Warner Brothers, famously rejecting almost every script she was given, whilst searching for the perfect project. She finally found it in Mildred Pierce, a noir melodrama about a successful businesswoman's fraught relationship with her daughter.
Maybe that's why, Father.
The film was hugely successful, and Crawford's performance was highly acclaimed. She won her first and only Academy Award. From an artistic standpoint, the following years were perhaps the best of Joan's entire career. She had acclaimed performances in a number of great films, although her career again began to stagnate, and once again, she left her studio, hoping for another reinvention. Only this time, it was even more of a struggle.
4 times we've done this routine, and 4 times you've lost it up.
Her big comeback movie, Torch Song, was a critical and commercial dud. With its generally over-the-top tone, garish aesthetic, and a deeply uncomfortable blackface scene.
I don't know why they scold me.
The film began Joan's transition into a caricature of her former self, and an object of camp spectacle. The following year came Johnny Guitar, which at the time only served to further damage Crawford's star image, especially among critics, who were unsparing in their descriptions of her appearance. Bosley Crowther in the New York Times said Joan was as sexless as the lions on the public library steps, and as sharp and romantically forbidding as a package of unwrapped razor blades, while Time magazine called her a Cowtown Liberace. It seemed to many that her iconic facial features, sculpted by makeup, that had once been proof of her natural beauty, had begun to look like a thinly applied mask of artifice. A failed attempt to cling on to old ideals of femininity that were both unfashionable and, for Crawford, now unattainable. Likewise, Crawford's aggressiveness, her quickness with a cutting remark.
There's a name for you ladies, but it isn't used in high society, outside of a kennel.
Or a slap to the face.
What's that for?
I do that in all my pictures.
Was now starting to read as unbecoming, too hard-edged and masculine.
So my right hand sort of slowed down. It has a mind of its own.
Then sit on it.
As Evelyn Katz writes, around the time of Torch Song and Johnny Guitar, it became impossible for any sane person to see Crawford as anything but camp. And that was the moment that her star began to fall. However, Crawford was able to reinvent her career once again in the 1960s with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which paired her with her great rival Bette Davis.
Who are you trying to help, Blanche? What are you planning to do with me when you've sold the house?
Who happened to be another of Joan's picks to play Emma in Johnny Guitar. The film is credited with kicking off the hag horror subgenre.
Now I wish that you would tell me.
These were exploitation films, which took iconic Hollywood actresses from decades prior and presented them in ways which were often grotesque. Hag horror would define the final stretch of Crawford's career. She appeared in several more movies in the genre. After Crawford's death, her daughter Christina released a controversial memoir entitled Mummy Dearest, which accused Joan of abusive behaviour and described her as having frequent manic episodes.
You be quiet! You're always rummaging through my drawers, trying to find a way to make people look at you. Why are you always looking at yourself in the mirror? Why are you doing that? Tell me!
The book was adapted into a movie, starring Faye Dunaway, who gives one of the most infamously over-the-top performances in the entire history of cinema.
I would be treated by any stranger on the street!
Angelica Jade Bastien wrote of Mummy Dearest that it turned the image of Crawford in the cultural imagination into a monstrous, a soulless camp icon to be mocked and reviled, but rarely respected, and a cautionary tale of what happens when women put their careers first. And so Crawford's status as a camp icon developed quite late in her career and didn't fully crystallise until after her death. It was built in part on fundamentally misogynistic notions that she was an aggressive woman who grew old without grace and asserted herself in ways that were fundamentally masculine. Although this isn't to say that those who enjoy Crawford's movies for their campiness are necessarily indulging in misogyny. Camp can be about rebellion and reclamation, taking that which a patriarchal culture deems grotesque and unwanted, and finding value in it.
Filth are my politics, filth is my life! Take whatever you like!
In Johnny Guitar, we see Crawford in mid-transition between two phases of her career, the respected actress she had been in the 1940s, and the camp icon she was now becoming. In retrospect, the role of Vienna seems to engage with many of the tensions of Crawford's career, roles, and star persona at this transitional moment. Like many of Joan's other characters, and indeed Joan herself, Vienna is an aging woman who is considered too aggressive and masculine. She's successful in business, but resented for that success. She has a sexual history, and is shamed for it. And yet, through it all, she remains unapologetic about who she is.
I'm not ashamed of how I got what I have. The important thing is I've got it.
Vienna's campiness, her tendency to express herself with bold gestures and flamboyant costumes, is not just a ridiculous spectacle for the audience to laugh at, it's also the embodiment of her individuality and selfhood, and her defiance of patriarchal norms.
Why do you come here? I knew you would, but why?
The campy excess of Johnny Guitar's tone, and its focus on women, has led many critics to try and separate the film from the Western genre, and claim that it might more properly be considered a melodrama. And yet Johnny Guitar was not the only Western of this era to engage in these themes, and to do so with this kind of excessive camp aesthetic and tone. Jewel in the Sun is a fever dream of blistering heat and smouldering sexuality. Controversial on release on account of its sexual content, it earned the nickname Lust in the Dust. The film lays bare the sexual undercurrents of the Western genre in a startlingly frank way. The main character is Pearl Chavez, played by Jennifer Jones. Her mother is a Native American saloon woman who does lascivious dances, whilst her father is an aging Southern gentleman who kills Pearl's mother out of sexual jealousy. After this, Pearl is sent to live with her father's distant relation, Laura Bell, played by iconic silent movie star Lillian Gish. Pearl is torn between two images of womanhood, the exciting, primal, sexually provocative image of her Native American birth mother, and the respectable, wholesome Christian femininity that her white adoptive mother wants her to embody.
All you
have to do is behave like a lady. Oh, not that Scott Chabert's daughter could ever be anything but a lady.
I'm a good girl, ma'am.
Of course you are.
In other words, she is torn between the two archetypes that I outlined at the start, schoolteacher and saloon girl.
Call her a child, Laura Bell? Under that heathen blanket, there's a full-blossom woman built by the devil to drive men crazy.
Like Johnny Guitar, Duel in the Sun manages to maintain a camp, absurd, ridiculous affect, defined by an excessiveness of performance and visual style, while still depicting its characters in ways that can be poignant and powerful. One criticism of Johnny Guitar has been that despite its atypical presentation of female sexuality, it still ends on the reaffirmment of the traditional heterosexual couple. Vienna and Johnny are able to reunite only once all the troublesome ambiguities brought about by Vienna's economic position, unseemly history, and ambiguous sexual identity are dealt with. Looking back at the scene where Vienna's saloon is burnt down, this moment, in a sense, functions as a symbolic cleansing of sin. Earlier we heard how Vienna had to do literally unspeakable things to pay for
every board, plank, and beam in this place.
Vienna's saloon was, for Johnny, the manifestation of all the sordid things he didn't want to hear about.
I told you I don't want to know anymore.
All the things that stood in the way of them going back to the happy days of the past. Memories that needed to be wiped away. The burning down of the saloon is later followed by a symbolic baptism for Vienna and Johnny. It's tempting to read the water and fire as washing and burning away Vienna's sinful past, purifying her so that she can be with the man she loves. In some ways, that final scene feels symbolically like a wedding, a reprise of the imaginary one that occurred earlier in the film. Indeed, before going through the waterfall, they do walk down an aisle of sorts. Although Vienna's past was not the only obstacle that needed to be overcome in order for the couple to be reunited. Early in the film, Turkey tries to impress Vienna with his gunplay, when Johnny emerges. He doesn't just respond to a potential threat, but instead goes over the top, displaying a sort of uncontrolled violent mania.
You're still gun crazy, aren't you?
There's an implication in the phrase gun crazy that violence is almost like an addiction to Johnny. Throughout the film, there are occasions where Johnny argues that killing would be the best way to deal with a situation.
Posse feels safe because it's big. They only make a big target. I can ride around and pick off a few. The rest of them will lose their guts, turn tail, break up, and go home.
But Vienna rebukes him, insists that it's not an option, and rejects him on account of his predilection for bloodshed.
You are gun crazy. It'll never be any different.
Towards the end of the film, the dancing kid, jealous about Vienna and Johnny's relationship, provokes Johnny and pretends to draw on him. Johnny's restraint, at least compared to his earlier behaviour, is subtly acknowledged by Vienna with a slight smile and a warm tone.
Sit down, Johnny.
I think we are to understand this as evidence of Johnny's growth, his willingness to change for Vienna. We get a brief scene of domesticity in the midst of all the violence, with Vienna making Johnny his breakfast, the two again seeming to play man and wife.
We've both done a lot of living. Our problem now is how to do a little more.
Leo Charney views Vienna and Johnny's arcs as allegorical for the shifts in identity women and men had to grapple with in the aftermath of World War II. He writes, Vienna, like women during the war, must make her way in commerce and industry. When Johnny returns, he is still trying to assimilate his violent past into the demands of the present society. Charney sees the final resolution as part of the film's strategy of containment, whereby all the themes that it deals with around politics and gender are contained, rendered safe within society's conventions. He claims that the film's containment strives to keep both women and excess in their place. Charney writes, within the post-war situation, the film's form suggests that women may enter the world of commerce when abandoned by their men, but once those men return, the female's primary role remains to nurture, support, and heal. For Charney, even the film's theme song reasserts societal and genre conventions by centering on Johnny.
Play it again, my Johnny.
And yet, as Jennifer Peterson writes, Peggy Lee's song at the film's close reasserts Vienna's presence over Johnny's.
There was never a man like my Johnny, like the one they call Johnny Guitar.
These words, sung by a female voice, assert Vienna's point of view, as if the entire film has just been narrated by her. Johnny is positioned as the object of the song. He is Vienna's possession, my Johnny, hers to marvel at. Indeed, one of the things that marks out Johnny Guitar is the way in which the narrative is shaped by the desires of the female characters, for both better and worse.
I got a name, mister.
As we've discussed, there's a tendency for critics to view Johnny Guitar as not really being a Western because of its strange tone and the fact that it centers on women.
You'll have to shoot.
However, I think that narrows our perception of what Westerns are and can be. To my mind, Johnny Guitar is not just clearly a Western through and through, but also a central text of the genre, just as much as Shane or The Searchers. I hope that what I've done in this video, placing Johnny Guitar within the context of how Westerns of the era presented female sexuality, has helped us understand it within a broader context, and revealed things about the film that we might not otherwise see. Next time we're going to be looking at a more recent film, The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, and discussing the archetype of the outlaw, and the strange relationship the Western genre has with time.